Welcome to Uzbekistan's Economic Forum 2021, where we are joined by the Deputy Finance Minister. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting.
First of all, what can you tell us about your efforts to put Uzbekistan on the map of foreign investors?
Of course, we started accessing global capital markets from 2019. Ever since the President Mirziyoyev has started opening up the economy, so 2017-2021 strategy of actions within which Uzbekistan is embarking upon quite a number of reforms. One of the important reforms in the agenda was to obtain international credit ratings, issuing bonds, which we, for the first time, inaugural bonds were issued in February 2019, and of course, developing capital markets. And in our country, without foreign investments, it will be very difficult to develop capital markets, and especially in today's age of IT, fintech, connectivity is important for us. And therefore, what we've done is, over the last 2 years, since we first visited capital markets, we've done Uzbek Sum denominated bonds as well. So the first one came last November, 2 trillion Sums, just under $200 million in Uzbek Sums, listed in London Stock Exchange and settled in US dollars, which attracted 5 trillion Sums of interest, 2.5 times oversubscription. In July, for the first time, we have created SDG bond framework that's ICMA compliant. So it's green bond principles, sustainable bond principles. So under this SDG framework, we issued the second Uzbek Sum denominated tranche, this time 2.5 trillion Sums. This way, we've already managed to attract foreign investors, not only to Uzbek credit story, but also to Uzbek currency story. So that's a big step. In terms of capital markets domestically, what we're focusing on right now, the program for 21-23 development was approved by the President in April, and first initial focus on the infrastructure, because we have to upgrade the infrastructure, we have to upgrade the IT systems, compliance, ensure there is integrity in the marketplace, so that even though the volumes are very, very little, we want to create a world-class infrastructure, legal and technical, to make sure whoever is going to come and trade in Uzbek capital markets can do it safely and with trust. And because we are already introducing Uzbekistan in international capital markets, one last thing we should do, which hopefully will happen in the next couple of years, is to establish the bridge between our clearing system and the Euroclear Clearstream, so that investors, wherever they are, in London, in Europe, in Asia, in the US, they can access capital markets without any problems, without setting up any vehicles in Tashkent or working with any brokers. So that's sort of the roadmap that we would like to achieve between now and end of 2023, and hopefully with the help of those changes, we will be able to attract foreign investors into our capital markets. And one last thing, if I may, we have a huge IPO program. So SOE blue chips of large Uzbek companies, currently state-owned, banks, insurance companies, 15 of them will be IPO'd in our local capital markets within the next 3 years as well. And this will also add to that momentum in terms of growing our capital markets. And of course, with the IPO itself comes the global depository receipts issuance, so that we can attract more foreign investors into our domestic companies as well. So that's sort of another angle, in addition to the infrastructure, in addition to the technical work and legal work we're doing, the IPO process, which is part of the whole privatization package, to come and hopefully attract foreign investors into Uzbekistan.
And investors, of course, will be given the opportunity to invest in a responsible way. You've mentioned the ESG bond you've issued recently. Is sustainable finance important for the development of the country?
My message is very, very simple. This is a market which will grow in the next 10 years. We will be a country of 40 million people. Our population will be larger than Poland's population, for instance, or Ukraine's population, for instance. Will be the second largest in CIS region. Secondly, with this growth in people, our GDP is also growing. The expectation is that by 2030, we will have upper middle income status, which is $4,500 per capita, which means that our current GDP in the next 10 years will triple from currently $60 billion to like $180 billion. So whoever is coming to invest in our companies will reap the benefits of tripling GDP, having the second largest market in Commonwealth of Independent States, and of course those in natural resource sector, those in production sector will have the opportunity to invest early on in this success story.
And they can invest responsibly. Since you have mentioned that, for instance, you offered this SDG bond, is sustainable finance important to the development of the country?
It's very important. It's not because it's a nice thing to do, because it's a hot thing to do, you know. It's very important because it's part of the transition to green economy. It's very important to us, whether it's in the energy sector, whether it's solar power, wind power, or our ambition to have 25% of our energy sector. This is a future that we would like to see ourselves be part of. And in order to make it reality, sustainable finance, whether it's SDG bonds, whether it's ESG frameworks, and you know what, the market is moving as well. I mean, you go to Europe, you go to the US, more and more investors, more and more banks are asking about ESG standards, whether any particular company or any particular bank meets those standards before they actually consider investing. And we are very much aware of this reality. It's not just a good thing to do, it's actually a necessary thing to do, and this is the way that we will progress going forward as well.
And the fact that the country is holding its first ever economic forum, how important is this, and what are the objectives? What are you trying to achieve?
You know, we've done 5 years of reforms, 5 years of fast track, because we were actually catching up with some of our peers, whether it's from Soviet Union or other post-communist countries in Europe. It's a catching up game, and therefore we had to fast track quite a lot of reforms in the last 5 years, and we've achieved quite a lot. And this is thanks to the advice provided by our development partners, international financial institutions, our transactional partners from private sector, from public sector. And this forum is important to us from the point of view of taking stock of what we've achieved so far, what are the key lessons that we've learned, and taking advice from the subject matter experts in terms of what we should be focusing on in future. This is not just the opportunity to showcase, but also to exchange ideas. Perhaps in some cases we may speed up things, or perhaps in some cases we should probably not rush. We mentioned about the connectivity earlier, and this is the time also to test this connectivity, because among 400 participants coming from abroad, international players, there are investors, FDI investors, portfolio investors, investment banks, consulting firms, of course audit firms, and many more people who are focused on their area of expertise, who know Uzbekistan, who know emerging markets, and we would like to make sure that these discussions will lead us to tailor the reforms in future so that Uzbekistan will succeed in these reforms and will have its rightful place in the global community.
Mr. Isakov, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.